Okay, with Chapter 24, we'll be going over facility policies, procedures, and legal issues. As stated in the last video, this chapter and the information within here, it will be on the EPC. For those who are going to internship and needing to take the EPC, which those who take internship will have to take it, you'll need to know the basic definitions, the concepts, and just the legal matters, because that will be on the exam. But also, if you are going into strength and conditioning or owning a facility or something where you will have, be in charge of a weight room, all the information here is important, because this really is how you're going to protect yourself and protect the athletes. So within here, we'll be talking about, the legal issues, liability, consent, and knowing, you need to have a planned out response. Well, one, you need to have kind of what are the procedures, the policies of the facility, and then you need to be able to have a way to address all of those as well. So within this, looking at like, what is the mission of the facility? What's the policies? And then policies are basically the rules. Procedures are then how you're going to carry out the rules. Making sure you have a well, planned out emergency plan in case something happens. So these things are all important because they're going to help protect you, protect the athletes, and protect the overall, the institution, protect then the overall as well, the facility. So make sure you know the information. And within here, like I said, this is something you'll need to know if you want to go into owning a facility, working at one, but also you need to know this for the EPC, which you'll take when you get in the internship. Chapter 24, facility policies, procedures, and legal issues. So the objectives here: develop and clarify the goals and objectives of a strength and conditioning program. Understand the daily operational practices of a strength and conditioning program and facility that will help to achieve the goals and objectives. Establish a standard of practice that leads to a safe and effective strength and conditioning program. Identify common areas of potential liability exposure and implement appropriate risk management strategies. Create a policies and procedures manual for a strength and conditioning program and facility, and properly schedule the strength and conditioning facility, along with formulating guidelines on seasonal playing and staff-to-athlete ratios. Okay, so this is, like I said in the intro, this is an important aspect of the overall facility, the overall program, is because you will be having people's lives in your hands. And so you need to make sure you have a proper policies, procedures lined up to protect you and to protect the athletes. So you need to have a clear goals, clear mission, clear procedure set up. That way you ensure the safety of everyone within the facility, including yourself and all the athletes and everyone else using the program and using the facility for training. Okay, so just make sure you have everything clearly written up, typed up, everything accessible to people, so you know exactly what is expected within the facility, and in case emergency should arise, how to respond to that. A couple of definitions. One, policies. So it's a facility's rules and regulations that should reflect the goals and objectives of the program. Procedures, and is describe how policies are met or carried out. Okay, so policies are the do's and don'ts of the program, of the facility, I should say, and then the procedures is how you carry out the do's and don'ts. Mission statement. So suggested criteria for an effective mission statement. This is according to the Drucker Foundation. Short and sharply focused, clear and easy to understand, defines why the organization exists, does not prescribe means, is broad in scope, provides direction for upholding code of ethics, and addresses and matches organization's scope of practice. Lastly, inspires commitment. Okay, so if you're designing up a mission statement, follow these guidelines here, and it will help protect you and protect the facility. Example of mission statement is to provide to athletes the means by which they can train consistently, sensibly, and systematically over designated periods of time in a safe, clean, professional environment to help prevent injury, improve athletic performance. So the key point, a mission statement is an organization's statement of purpose, providing the strength and conditioning program with focus and direction. And you can see this statement right here follows those guidelines. It's short, to the point. It's general, but it covers everything within the goals and direction of the strength and conditioning facility. So program objectives. This is just a sample list of objectives to reach program goals. The first two, you can see, well, the first one is strength, flexibility, aerobic, plyometric, and training programs to reduce the likelihood of injuries, improve performance. And then the second one is training programs based on biomechanical and physiological differences among individual athletes, taking into consideration age, sex, training status, physical limitations, injury status. So both of these are really more or less looking over over the entire facility and the program to ensure that you get the greatest out of your athletes, but while also maintaining the health of them as well, limiting injuries as much as possible. That's always kind of I've been saying this throughout the whole semester, really is one of the main objectives of any program, should be to reduce injuries and maintain the health of your athletes. You see, recognize acute and chronic physiological responses and adaptations and their implications for the design of sport-specific training programs. Educate athletes on the importance of good nutrition and sleep and their role in health and performance. And educate athletes about the effects of performance-enhancing substances and their abuse, relevant school policy and legislation. Once again, kind of just given these points are just saying our goal is to maintain the most, the high standard of care, high standard of operation for athletes and everyone within the facility, reducing injuries, maintaining professionalism, and providing an education to the athletes, but while also helping out to respond to emergencies whenever something might occur, injuries and so forth. But you have objectives on how to address anything that could go possibly wrong within the program. So within the performance team, so job responsibilities vary according to the institution. So you get to the big programs like, your top SEC, Big 12 programs. Well, usually the head person in charge would be the director of strength and conditioning. You can see at the bottom right there, the head strength and conditioning coach. They'll be the director of strength and conditioning is their title a lot of times, but they're, within the actual position, they are the top strength coach. So being directors, they're looking over all the strength and conditioning programs taking place, but then being just a head strength coach, because a lot of kind of does fall within strength and conditioning. You might have a physical therapist on staff. You might have some rehab ATs, things of that nature. Not that the ATs actually answer to the director, but within that performance team, the director will be the top one, and then he'll be the head of just strength and conditioning. Now you get to the smaller schools. Well, let me go back. So that director of strength and conditioning, director, he or she will be have a big team, have a lot of assistant strength coaches working with football, and have a lot of staff underneath them. You get to the smaller programs, to your smaller Division I, you're really in your Division II and Division III. The head strength coach is in charge of everything. They have to do the programming. They have to do most of the training. They basically are the one person could be the entire staff. Because you can see that the director, they have a lot more going on. So they can see overall strength and conditioning program they're director of, looking over the facility, equipment, staff, and then other administrative roles. Sometimes the director of strength and conditioning will be the assistant AD of athletics at times. So at the big programs, the director has a lot of hats to fill. Okay, but you get to the smaller schools, they may not have as much role administrative, and they'll be more in terms of they have to maintain the facility, the equipment, and they are the only one within staffed. Okay, I know with us, for a while, we only had one strength coach for all the sports at TAMUK. Well, that's a lot for one person to handle. Now we've gotten at least one more in, but most of your big programs will have a huge staff. Smaller programs might only have just one or just a few. Okay, so the responsibility is going to vary based upon the school, the size of the institution. So you should have wherever you're at right there. You can see like the second point, consult the strength and conditioning professional standards and guidelines. They'll help explain this a little bit more, but really it should be whenever you're designing your facility, you know what kind of staff's going to be there. There should be clear-cut procedures, clear-cut rules, regulations, everything, detailing out what every person within the strength and conditioning staff, the team, should be responsible for. Points of preparedness required for each member of the strength and conditioning staff. Maintenance of professional certification. So this is going to be the through the NSCA, which is what our book is covering from, is the CSCS. So the Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. That's the main one that the NCAA is really recognizing. You also have the CSCCA, the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association. That's another certification. There's also USA Weightlifting. Those are the three certifications that the NCAA will recognize. However, the CSCS would be, because you need an actual college degree for the CSCS within a relevant field. That is kinesiology, exercise science. I think they might even allow biology. But it has to be within a science field in order to get that certification. So there's a high level of professionalism with that certification. Okay, and the NCAA is actually wanting two. Usually they want the CSCS and the USA Weightlifting. Those are the two ones I highly recommend getting if you're going in this field. In terms of other care, CPR, AED, first aid certification through that, American Red Cross, or the American Heart Association. Just depends on the on whatever the athletics department's requiring on that one. Make sure you review of emergency response procedures, and then, of course, know and understand everything that's going on within the area. So you have policies, procedures within the facility, but also know within it says governing body. So that means NCAA, okay, within the SEC, Big 12, whatever conference that the university is within. Also, no cleaning and maintenance issues, and then follow the program philosophy and instruction methods. So as I said, everything needs to be clearly defined for a program, and needs to follow everything to a T on that. All policies, procedures within the facility, within the university, within the NCAA, and also within SEC, Big 12, Big 10, whatever case you might be. Some terminology, make sure you know these. So one, you got informed consent. So the process by which a procedure or activity is described to a participant with an explanation of inherent risk, benefits involved, and allowing the individual to determine if he or she desires to participate. Okay, so you make sure you get, a lot of places you need to get some kind of informed consent. That is, what you're doing is you're just informing the individual of everything taking place while they're within your care. We have to do this in research all the time. Let the participants know, okay, you're going to participate in the study. This is everything that's going to be going on during the study that you'll be participating in. And then you have to allow them to make the yes or no decision. You got liability, so legal responsibility, duty or obligation. By virtue of their employment, strength and conditioning professionals have a duty to the athletes they serve, not only to act when an injury occurs, but also to prevent injury. Okay, we as strength coaches are liable. We can be held liable if we're doing something too nefarious. But, like I've said, your goal as a strength coach is to keep your athletes safe and healthy and injury-free. That's more important than anything else that you could possibly do. Standard of care, so what a reasonable, prudent person would do under similar circumstances. You have negligence, failure to act as a reasonable and prudent person would under similar circumstances. So, a allowing your athletes to squat heavy with no spotters. That would be a form of negligence as a strength coach. You got assumption of risks. So knowing that inherent risks exist with participation in an activity and voluntarily deciding to participate anyway. Okay, so make sure you know these terminology and know how they're defined. So go to screening and medical clearance. So standard 1.1 says requires participants to undergo healthcare provider screening and clearance prior to participation. Okay, just like we do in high school, go get a physical before you can participate. You have to get cleared before you can participate. It says the strength and conditioning professional does not need a copy of the physical examination, but should require a signed statement to show proof of medical clearance. Okay, that's confidential between the athlete and the physician. So, it needs to stay confidential unless the strength coach has to be involved with some kind of, they'll a lot of times strength coaches will only be known of when the athlete injures himself or something like that. That's when they inform you of the injury at that point. But to participate, the strength coach doesn't need their physical examination. They just need a statement saying, hey, he or she is cleared to participate. And within that informed consent, that's basically a liability waiver. So it says all participants must sign a liability waiver, which should be notified as needed to comply with local and national laws. Okay, so when you're signing that in, you're being informed. That's kind of a form of liability waiver. So you're basically signing that and saying, yes, I know what's going on. It says reducing liability for on-premise injuries during use of the facility is critical in any risk management strategy. So who should be allowed in the facility? This is one that you'll see when we spend time in some collegiate strength rooms. There's way too many people walking around than that should be in there. But really the only ones that should be in there it says full or part-time student athletes that participate in athletic department sponsored sport. Okay. Club teams don't count. Only those who are participating in an NCAA sanctioned sport that's on campus should be in there. So newly incoming and just transfer students who have confirmation of team status designed by the head coach. Students in physical education classes. I taught during my PhD at LSU. I taught within the weight room within Tiger Stadium. Okay, so I had clearance from the supervisor in that building, which was also allowed from the director of strength and conditioning, said yes, they're allowed to teach in this classroom. And so my students were allowed to go in the weight room, but it's only my students and only those taking my class, and that's it. And you have athletic department, coaching and administrative staff, sports medicine staff, alumni who participate in the athletic department, sponsor the sport and complete their eligibility, or any individuals or groups approved by athletic director or director of strength and conditioning. Okay, so only ones should be in the weight room should be those who are cleared by those who are in charge, the athletic director or the director of strength and conditioning. Make sure you keep a record of everything. So anything cleaning, maintenance, safety procedures, any warranties, guidelines of equipment, informed consent forms, medical waivers, clearance forms, personnel credentials, professional guidelines, recommendations, injury report forms. Everything that takes place in this facility should be documented and kept, whether electronic or hard copy, should one way or another be kept on record. Liability insurance. So contractual promise by which the insurer promises to defend and indemnify the insured up to the defined limits of liability from certain defined liability risks at the insurer's cost in exchange for payment of a premium. Strength and conditioning professionals should consult their human resources manager, legal consultant, professional organizations such as the NSCA. NSCA. Product liability. Use equipment only for the purpose intended by the manufacturer. Be certain equipment meets existing professional standards. Buy only reputable manufacturers. Okay, buy things from somebody that actually has a name in the industry. Don't do anything to the equipment to try and change it. That's just going to put you and your athletes at risk because probably mess it up somehow. Says apply all warning labels that accompany new equipment and keep inspecting when you're cleaning them. Inspect them, check them out for damage and wear and tear. And do not allow unsupervised athletes to use equipment. Okay, you should always be watching over your athletes at all times, knowing exactly what they're doing. Discipline. So here's an example of a tiered penalty system applied to repeated violation. So you got first, second, third, fourth, and fifth offense. First one be verbal warning, going over explaining what's taking place from the guidelines that were broken. Second offense, dismissal from the facility for 1 day. Make sure you document this so everyone is aware of what's taking place, and notifies as a sport coach of the athlete. Third offense, dismissal for 1 week, documentation of the offense, and then talk with the sport coach again. Fourth offense, dismissal from the remainder of the year, document, and then talk with the coach and the athletic director at that point. And then the fifth offense, permanently dismissal from the facility, documentation of the offense by a staff member, and corresponds with the athlete, sport coach, and athletic director. Okay, so you can see in all these, make sure you document every single offense, and let the sport coach and know what's going on. Eventually, you have to go to the athletic director. Okay, but make sure everything's documented. That way, you have a record of what took place. So, supplements, ergogenic aids, banned substances. So, this is within the strength and conditioning standards and procedures, or standards and guidelines. It says the strength and conditioning professional must not prescribe, recommend, or provide drugs, control substances, or supplements that are illegal, prohibited, or harmful to participants in any purpose, including enhanced athletic performance, conditioning, or physique, etc. Basically, stay away from any kind of legal drugs, and do not give to your athletes. Okay, if you hear of them taking them, make sure you let those who are in charge know exactly what's taking place, because the last thing you want to have happen is this is taking place underneath your care. You'll be in trouble. The school will be in trouble. There's going to be a lot of legal issues. Okay, so just stay away from them, and just once you see this taking place, report it as soon as possible. Okay, reporting and documentation. Here's just a list of additional records that should be developed and maintained. Okay, we kind of talked about some of them, but this goes just a little bit more in detail. So you can read through all these, make sure you know all these ones right here. But basically, just everything. Everything about your personnel, your staff, anything about the equipment, any kind of maintenance issues, liabilities, medical clearances, anything like that. Anytime you have to write somebody up, keep track of everything, report and collect it, and make sure you have everything taking place. So there's a code of ethics and professionalism. They should become the strength and conditioning professionals should become familiar with the NSCA code of ethics, as well as the institution's code of ethics and student athlete code of conduct. Athlete welfare is generally the primary focus. Okay, so we are a professional field. We need to be professional. Make sure you're operating underneath the code of ethics for both the NSCA and the institution, the university, behaving in a proper manner. Okay, you're working with athletes, so make sure you treat each athlete with professionalism and just know what's expected of you. And the last we need is to have the strength and conditioning profession being destroyed because of bad strength coaches. Okay, so hold yourself up high for going in this field, or any field really, but make sure you act with professionalism, the proper ethics, and treating everyone with respect and dignity. So instruction and supervision. So principles of supervision, always be there. Be active and hands-on, okay? And when we say hands-on, be careful. Hands-on means you're being on the platform showing what's going on. and sometimes you do have to readjust athletes in their positions. But like I said, be prudent, careful, and prepared. Okay, know where you are in relation to your athlete. Okay, if you have to kind of show them readjust position, make sure your hands are not in a bad place. Make sure that you're not too close to athletes showing them. Be conscious of where you're at in relation to them. But sometimes know that you do kind of have to show them a little bit. So just be cautious, be careful, be professional, and keep a high level of professionalism at all times. But make sure you're always on the platform. Don't write your work up on the board and then take off and go in your office and watch YouTube while your athletes are lifting. Be there. Like I says, be vigilant, be qualified. That means have the degrees and certifications. Make sure like it says, the participants' health assess. Know your athletes. Talk with them. Get an idea of where they're at. Okay? And constantly have a high level of operation at all times within your facility. Key point, the risk of injury cannot be totally eliminated, but can be effectively managed by strength and conditioning professional. Athletes are going to get injured. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. So just make sure at all times, that you do what's right to try and minimize this as much as possible. You can see right here the professional to participant ratios. So this is within junior high, it's 1 coach to 10 athletes. High school is 1 coach to 15. And college and above, professional will be 1 to 20. So the younger the athlete, the more eyes you have to have on them. Less athletes, so you can watch all of them a lot more closely to make sure they're doing anything right. And the more advanced they become, you can handle more athletes, because by that time, technique's gone better on your athletes. They know what to do, and you can watch a lot more once you get to the college and professional level. Facility administration. So a list of rules and policies should be posted in the training area where it can be easily seen at all times, so everyone knows exactly what's expected of them. Program design. So the director of strength and conditioning should oversee and monitor all performance training programs, including reconditioning. Okay, the head coach should always be aware of what's taking place at all times with their athletes. They may not be training them, might have your assistants training them if you're at a bigger program, but you should still know exactly what's going on with your athletes at all time. So you should always, and also most programs do this. They print out the programs for the athletes they have, and they leave those need to be left in the weight room itself. But it says like a copy of all programs designed by staff. So a list of exercise performed should be reviewed and on file in director's office before a team begins their program. Here, so this is the workout sheets. These are the ones that are usually left in the weight room, in the filing cabinet someplace. But it says the process of generating a workout sheet is different for each strength and conditioning program, but it should be arranged. So you should have some kind of workout sheet so the athletes know what's going on. They can write, they can track down what they're doing, and it helps out then with the strength coach to keep a track of what's going on, monitoring and readjusting need be. You got emergency planning. So those who are familiar with CPR kind of knows the steps with this, but make sure you have a procedure contacting EMS. Make sure that there's names and telephone numbers of a primary, secondary, tertiary individual contact in case something happens to an athlete. There should be a specific address of the strength and conditioning facility. And then it says location of telephones and nearest exits. Okay, you should be able to describe sometimes the facilities are kind of located in in an awkward, or to entry to the weight room might be in a different location. Like, let me explain this, because I'm starting to think about LSU. And so when you go to LSU, the weight room to the football is, when you're driving on the street that's located, the front of the building is actually all the offices and everything like that for football facilities. Well, the weight rooms, to get access to that, you have to go down a driveway back behind that to get to the actual weight room. Okay, so that needs to be, things of that sort need to be explained to EMS and have a way on these phones explaining to them, all right, this is where we're located in case they need to show up. Okay, so that's needs to be clearly defined, because not every weight room is just going to be, on every program is going to be right in the main street that, you know, EMS could get to right away. Make sure there's access for any kind of emergency services. Make sure you know where the CPR or the AED is located and all that in case you need to use. And of course, if there's any kind of weather related, so tornado, any kind of fire, any life-threatening injury, crime, terrorism, so forth, make sure you have a plan of action for any kind of situation. Okay, I know, I guess one day at LSU, we're working with baseballs in the springtime, and I got to the facility, I don't know, 5:30, something like that, to go train the guys, and all they kept talking about was a tornado's coming in. It's supposed to be a tornado a little bit later on. Well, you know, I left 7:30 from the weight room to go get ready to go teach for the day, and sure enough, I got to my office, and within about 30 minutes, I looked outside, and it looked like it was midnight outside, because a tornado, you know, luckily didn't land, but the storm was that bad to where it darkened the whole entire skies. And so some of these areas, you're going to have those kind of issues. So you need to have a plan of action for anything that could arise, such as, like I said, tornado, fire. You know, I know out west there's a lot of fires taking place right now. So if something like that happens, now granted, you're not going to be really trained if there's a forest fire, but, you know, you just never know. So make sure you have a plan of action for every situation. So the staff should acquire and maintain emergency first response certification. So like we said, first aid, CPR, AED. Says establish a direct line of communication and formulate a backup plan in case there's something that takes place with the emergency communication. And the equipment should be readily accessible. That means there should be an AED in every single room or within access to every room, you know, close to it in the facility. But most likely each one has, in each major training area, has their own AED. So roles of the emergency team. It says provide immediate care for athletes as time is the most critical factor in emergency situations. The faster you respond, the faster you act. It gives a chance, if something's really bad taking place for an athlete, a better chance of survivability. Okay, we have had last number of years, a lot of football players having heart attacks out in the field. So I'm not saying the response team didn't, you know, respond fast enough, because I don't know the details of all that, but we all know the faster care is given, the better the chance of surviving is going to be. Just know, for every new staff that comes in, every new personnel, make sure that the director is going through the entire procedures with every staff member. Training should be done on a regular basis as well, so everyone's familiar with locations of everything, the AEDs, the exits. Everyone's familiarized with how to contact EMS and have a line of communication to get them to where they need to be. And then just make sure everyone is on top of the plan in case something happens to respond to an emergency situation. Okay, here's the emergency planning response. I'm sure you've seen all this. This is, you know, if you're taking CPR, AED, you've had all this, but just make sure you know these steps. I'm not going to go through them all, but just be familiar with something happens, call 911, get an emergency on the line, and then going from that point. Okay. Like I said, life-threatening situations, if you're taking CPR, you know, don't move the victim. Make sure that everyone's clear if you have to use AED. Basically, for that type of situation, you're just trying to help prolong until emergency, you know, more medical care gets on site. Environmental situations, well, if there's a tornado coming in, get everyone away from the windows, kind of deal, you know. Anyways, just be familiar with these, kind of know them, and, you know, be familiar with just these steps. Okay, going over what we talked about here, I'm sure you've probably heard some of these terms before, like informed consent, liability, negligence, some of those things you probably heard at this point. So you should make sure you know all those terms, all the definitions, policies being what are the rules, procedures being how do you carry out those rules and what's taking place. And so just make sure you know all those aspects within kind of the legal framework and the policies. Make sure if you have a facility that you have a mission statement clearly stated, and then have that being addressed, and have ways that you make sure to carry out all the rules or regulations within the facility. Make sure that you have a proper emergency protocol, whether it's threatening or non-life threatening. Make sure you have all your staff are trained up, they have the credentials, and then they're all knowing and they know the procedures, the policies, as well as then how to carry out, like I said, in case an emergency occurs, how they want to carry out those rules, regulations, the procedures, policies. That way it keeps you protected, keeps the athlete protected, and the goal is to maintain as healthy and safe environment for athletes and staff as much as possible. Injuries are going to occur, unfortunately. However, the goal is how can we minimize these as much as possible, to keep those low, and just really keep everyone protected, keep everyone safe, and that way it keeps everything functioning, operating at a high standard, because professionalism is going to be the key throughout all this. Okay, I can't stress that enough. To any field you go into is professionalism. Carry yourself to a high standard, do what's right, and then just make sure you're living up to that standard no matter what you're going into. Okay, so just to sum up, make sure you know everything within this chapter, all the definitions, the concepts. You'll be tested on it within here, but also when you take the EPC, when you get to internship. And also this stuff is all good to know no matter what area you go into, what field you go into, because I'm sure a lot of you will be in charge of running some kind of program, some kind of facility. So it's just good to know the do's and don'ts, policies, procedures to keep you protected and to keep the athlete protected as well.